Hello, welcome to David Galata Book Dreamer. I'm David Galata, and I'm dreaming up books such as Crew of Ganges and Clockmaker. Yes, that's me. Plus five others, working on a couple now. So let's begin today. Today's topic is how many genres can you fit in one book? Uh, it wasn't too long ago where it seemed like every book had its own genre. There was very little intermixing that was going on. And, this was very true also for painting. The visual arts were also very much ruled by what genre was it. Were you doing deconstructionism? Were you doing impressionism, realism, hyperrealism? Were you, you know, doing abstract expression? All these different things. And you focused on one and you left the others alone. Uh, there was a movement in the art world that was called pluralism. That was what the critics called it anyway. And my own work was put into that category of pluralism, being pluralistic. And what that meant was those of us that did that kind of work looked at the various schools of art as tools in a toolbox. And you can use whatever tool you needed at the time as long as the painting looked like it was a singular style. So, yeah, there were some impressionist elements, some abstract elements, even some hyper real elements in the work, but it looked like one thing. It didn't look like a, mash of different things. And that was not easy. It was very difficult to pursue, but it was worth pursuing because looking at all these wonderful styles of art, you could really see where you could mix and match some of them. You could really pick some out. You maybe have a sky that is purely abstract expressionism, and the emotions of that sky had to fit the emotions of the piece. In the meantime, you might have something realist there, say, an object of some form, and you could even paint it in a more impressionist style, even put an impressionist landscape in with that, and maybe have a figure in there that is beautifully rendered. And this produced really interesting works. Um, there were two forms. One was called visionary pluralism, which meant that there was something very deep going on in terms of a message. And that's where a lot of my artwork ended up being part of. And I still, whenever I paint and work on my covers, I still utilize a bit of pluralism in there, which seems to be very effective. So we're going to stick with that. So now we have writing. We're going to go into writing here. How many genres can you fit in a book? Only if those genres make sense to the storyline. Okay. The plot has to be in charge. If you lose sight of the plot because you're too busy tossing in different genres, it's not going to work. It's going to look like a mess. It's going to sound like a mess when people read it. It's not going to make as much sense. It will be more confusing. However, that being said, there are some really wonderful examples of pluralism in certain genres, and science fiction seems to be leading the pack. For example, let's look at the very famous um, television series Firefly. That was a mixture of science fiction and westerns. It worked well. It worked so well. It still has rabid fans. And, well, I guess I'm one of them. And it showed us what was possible in terms of storytelling, in terms of character development. You almost forgot some of that this was a mixing of two different genres, the Western film and the science fiction. Science fiction can be mixed in with a lot of different genres, And what's interesting about science fiction in particular is it does not seem to suffer from the results. It doesn't suddenly cease to be science fiction. Whereas, let's say you put science fiction elements into a fantasy book, now there really comes a question. Is this fantasy, or was it really science fiction all along? So you have to be very careful about how you present any elements in. Having a cowboy in a fantasy piece has to make some kind of sense. It has to have a reason. Otherwise, the reader's just going to say, well, you're just taking all your favorites and mashing them together into one thing. Another element that's really interesting is the superhero genre. And that one also has this tendency of leaning a little heavier towards science fiction. But there are times when it leans in more of a fantasy direction. And yet we have both at the same time. You have people with superpowers that are not clearly explained or explained through a means of fantasy. They found, a special, amulet or ring that makes them powerful, or they were descendants of these incredibly powerful people who had all these abilities. And they are coming out now and are trying to be heroes. And they can mix with the person who has the superpower suit and, has all kinds of gadgets and whatnot that are more along the lines of science fiction. So again, that particular genre, the superhero genre, seems to be a really nice fit when it comes to a pluralistic style of storytelling. You're not so worried then if the cowboy shows up and joins your heroes, as long as that cowboy is equally heroic. So we've got to make sure that when we're mixing genres into a book, that it doesn't make a sloppy mess, that these are actually vital ingredients that make the plot move and aids the storyline and enriches the experience of the reader. One of the things that occurred to me when writing Crew of Ganges was that this ship is huge. It is absolutely monstrously huge. There are millions of crew aboard the ship Ganges. That means there's a lot of room for different cultures. This was first seen in a television show that did not do well, but was interesting nonetheless, called Starlost. And that was a Canadian production, I believe. And it showed a generation ship. Unfortunately, it was really ahead of its time, and it did not have the budget it should have had. But the stories were very intriguing, and it was wonderful to see people like Roman archetypes in one dome of the ship. And the ship was, again, generation ships tend to be huge. I mean, they're monstrously huge because they have to keep a civilization going for generation after generation. They're slow boats. They're not going faster than light. They're slow boats in general. Although, there could be changes with that. Just saying, just saying. And so each dome had its own civilization. Ah, okay. So now you have Rome in one, you've got, Westerns in another, you've got steampunk type people in another one, you've got, all these different cultures that are now trying to survive in a ship that is lost. Fabulous. Absolutely fabulous. And so when you look at something like a generation ship, like Ganges here, you really do have a wonderful opportunity to be able to mix genres in such a way that it really helps the story and it really enriches the experience of the reader. Crew of Ganges, there's a mystery going on. That's part of the main plot line, is a mystery, because it involves the strifers who are trying to stop the holy mission of the ship, which is terraforming new planets for colonists to come and live on. they're trying to, halt the ship, but someone seems to be giving them all kinds of terrible toys to use. Who is doing this and why? Are the strifers being used by some nefarious bunch of people, or have the strifers finally figured out how to do things on their own and they are holding other people hostage perhaps and saying you will give us this equipment or else? It's not clear because it's a mystery, and the main character is trying to solve the mystery behind why the strifers have gone from peaceful protesters to violent terrorists. Why is this happening? And who's behind that change? Because it was for Ganji's, a sudden change. So he has to go through various other places. He used to be a rattler, which meant he was a biker. Oh, so now it's a tale about a biker in space. Okay, okay, that's a little different. He was a bodyguard. He was guarding the son of the captain of the vessel, hired by the executive officer. Okay, all right, that's kind of interesting. But he doesn't want to get anyone official involved because he doesn't trust the officials. Someone high up in the power system seems to be working behind the scenes. So he has to go throughout different sections of the ship and pull people together that he's worked with before. He ends up with a crew of people that include Lakota Sioux, that include country western, that include gangers and rattlers. And so now you have people from different genres suddenly working together in a ship, but it makes sense because each level of the ship is radically different. Some are rainforests, some are temperate forests, some are deserts. You have every known environment inside the ship, split by levels and wheels. You have people who, live in Agro 4, which is filled with oceans and seas and things like that. You have uh, people who are basically non-technological living in Agro 2 in the rainforest, and they're very happy there. But these people are all involved because the entire ship is being threatened. So for the reader, it's like, oh, okay, so this kind of makes sense. These people have been living this way for generation after generation, and now they're getting involved in this because they had some dealings with the main characters. There we go. As long as everything links in to that main storyline, you're going to be okay. But you can't just throw things like, well, I think I'm just going to throw, a steampunk dwarf into the spaceship. Whoa, whoa, whoa. So you're saying that elves and dwarves and ogres and things are real and they're in the spaceship. Now, there may be reasons why this can be. There are some science fiction uh, paths that say, well, these are actually humans, but they've evolved over the generations. Yeah, you could do that. That might be reasonable, but it's a bit of a stretch. It's a bit of a stretch. We're not talking Dungeons and Dragons here. We are talking a science fiction novel. So it's always best to stick a little closer to the real. There are superheroes in my trilogy. Why? These are a crew who have decided to take matters into their own hands and are using technological means to do so. Some of them are inventors and have created, the things that give them the powers that they have to be superheroes. And the main character has to deal with them, possibly work with them, or even say, oh, no, 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 you're on the wrong side, pal. These are the things that crop up. Um, I even put medieval elements in there. People who want to live in a non-technological way, and they have their little castle made of stone, and they live an old style of life, but they end up becoming allies with certain characters in the books, and so you have them appearing whether it's in their tunics and hose or in their plate mail with their swords and shields. Either which way, they make sense because they're part of something that is real, something that could very much happen in a world without magic. However, that being said, well, Arthur Clarke once said that any high form of technology could be seen as magic to those who do not understand the principles involved. He said a lot cleaner than that, but that was the gist of his statement, was that any sufficiently high level of technology would appear as magic to others. And yes, you have that kind of thing in science fiction. You could even have that within the same ship if that ship is large enough. Or you could have colonies, you could have space stations or ring worlds or any number of vehicles for these things. A ring world's a wonderful way. Larry Niven showed the way with that one. There are different genres in the ring world series. It's a series now. Ringworld showed us that with such a huge space, all different types, you could have a tremendous number of cultures and even other species living in the ring without even having any contact with each other, because it is literally several Earths away from each other. So these are things to keep in mind. Set things up carefully. If you're going to do multi-genre works, you can fit a lot of them into science fiction, but you cannot always add science fiction to a lot of other genres. So be cautious with that. But the blend is very compelling. Being able to blend genres is a lot of fun, especially when it's done right for both the writer and the reader. So it is something to explore. It is a good idea. So how many genres can you fit in a book? As many as make sense to the plot line. That's the main point. That plot line that you've created and the scene in which it takes place, the setting, the world that you build, is going to be your guide as to how many genres you can put in. But remember, you may not want them all. So try not to crowd the field too much, but as long as it makes sense and it fits in the world that you have created for your book and it does not impede the plot line but moves it forward, have fun and enjoy all the interactions that occur when you are mixing different genres together. So I hope that you have enjoyed this. I enjoy talking about this topic. Obviously, I've been going on for a bit now. And next week, we'll be taking on yet another general topic about writing and about reading. I hope to see you all next week. Thank you for watching, and please do hit that subscribe button, and that way you'll be notified when a new one comes up, and you'll be able to enjoy that too. Thank you so much again, and I'll catch you next week.